In this video, we're looking at bending with vibrato. I've had quite a few requests recently for this, and they ask, is there a way that I can actively improve my ability to bend a note and add vibrato and actually make it sound good? And in fact, there are a few things you can do to actively work on this, so we're going to take a look at that right now. Let's check it out. There are two main aspects about bending with vibrato that you want to pay very close attention to in order to improve your ability to do it on a consistent basis. And those two things are depth and rhythm. Let's take a look at depth. Depth means after a bend, now here I'm bending A on the B string and I'm bending it up a whole step. I'm bending it to B. Once my pitch is reached, depth insinuates how low I go before I go back up. You want that to be fairly consistent. You want your depth to be relatively the same every time. Now it's up to you how deep you go. You can return to the full starting point note. In other words, if you're bending A to B, you can return all the way back to A if you wish. That'll give you a very deep cavern of, depth there. But in some cases, it might be better to only do a very shallow dip, maybe only a quarter tone, or maybe a half step. Be very aware and cognizant of how far you are coming down when you practice this. You're not going to be able to be that cognizant of it when you're playing it for real. So think of it this way. When you play for real, you're only executing what you've practiced at a very high level. So when you're practicing this concept of depth, be aware of how far you are coming down and try to be consistent with it. All right? The other aspect to this is part 2, which is rhythm. Now, this has another aspect to it. You can practice different rhythms. Like depth, when you have different depths in which you can allow the bend to come down before you return, you can also control the rhythm. So what I'm going to do here, and what I'm going to suggest is you grab a metronome. Mine looks like that. You might have one on your phone. That's cool too. What I would do is set it to something reasonable. Well, I've got it set to 120 right now, so I'll keep it at that. And what you're going to do is practice different rhythmic values. You might at first want to start with something really basic like quarter notes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend my note A up to B, whole step. And I'm going to choose a depth. Before I even begin this process of rhythmic stuff, I'm going to do a half step dip. And what I do is I start by playing quarter notes. In other words, I'm going to dip and return on every beat. Now that takes quite a bit of control. I have, obviously I have some gain on my amp, so I can do this with one pick stroke for a while before I need to repick. Repick as often as you need to. And be able to do that reliably and consistently for a while. Then you might do eighth notes. That's 2 notes per beat. It should sound like this. Now, if you're controlling both the depth and the rhythm, you're starting to develop control. Everything technique-wise, whether it's bending, picking, fretting, legato, sweep picking, tab, anything, it's all about control. If you don't have control, you're not going to get the results that you want. Control is achieved by taking control at a level that you can manage it. right? That's why we're doing these very slowly. Quarter notes are pretty slow. Eighth notes. You can do eighth note triplets. Eighth note triplets is 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. Ba 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 ba. If you want to hear it. Right? If you are feeling adventurous, you could do 16th notes. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. I'll slow that down. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. Every number that you count, the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4, should land right on the beat. So at 120, it's going to sound a little ridiculous, but 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So I'm keeping my depth, how far down I come, consistent. I'm also cognizant and aware of managing the rhythm. Now, why care about all this stuff? Well, if you don't, you're going to end up with something that maybe reflects the correct movement. You might go, well, yeah, I can feel that I'm shaking the note, but you end up with something like this. Which, to be frank, sounds like a strangled cat, right? So, not very musical. And I've heard a lot of players who, unfortunately, that aspect of their playing is not very musical, despite how well they're able to do other things technically. And that's a shame, because vibrato, whether on a single note, unbent, or with a bent note, is kind of your voice. It's kind of your voice signature. It's kind of your fingerprint. Think of all the players who you can recognize just by hearing them. A lot of times, I can tell a player just by their vibrato. You know, you take someone like a George Lynch or Yngwie Malmsteen, B.B. King. How many albums did B.B. King release before his passing? I don't even think he remembers. It was well over 50 or 60, for sure. I've heard maybe 3 B.B. King songs in my life. But every time I hear one, I know it's him because of his distinct... He's got a very distinct vibrato. His was more akin to like a hummingbird. It was a very narrow depth and a very fast or frequent rhythm, right? He had 16th note based, but his depth wasn't very deep. It was more shallow, right? So whenever I would hear him, I would know, even if I didn't know the song or the tune, if I'd never heard it, and again, there's a lot of songs to hear, if I heard one, I would know it was him just by his vibrato. That's something that you can develop on your own. So it's worth working on. Break it down into these elements, practice it, but when you actually play, don't worry about this stuff. You can't. You can't really have a great performance or an organic feel to what you're doing if you're concerned about depth and rhythm when you're doing that. That's not the time to do it. The time to do it is in the practice room, and you can sit there and literally analyze every motion, and you can embed these movements and these considerations into what you do when you bend a note and add vibrato. That's what I would take a look at. Those are the elements I would look for. Let me know how this goes for you. I'd be very curious to hear how you make out with this. Have a good one.